On July 20th, 1969, millions of people gathered around the televisions to watch two US astronauts do something no one had ever done before, leaving us the iconic statement, "One step for man, a giant step for mankind." But many skeptics would ask, did Apollo 11 really land on the moon, or was it all a ruse to claim dominance in the space race? How would a flight to the moon have been possible when you have to go through radiation belts, solar flares, solar wind, coronal mass ejections, and cosmic rays? Join us as we unravel the mystery of the moon landing. Rumors that it never happened had been in the heart of the public since the late 70s. And this intensified when a former US naval officer published a book in 1976 titled "We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 Billion Swindle." The book claims that the chance of a successful crewed landing on the moon was calculated to be 0.0017%, and that despite close monitoring by the USSR, it would have been easier for NASA to fake the moon landings than to really go there. Plus, the temperature of the moon during the day is 103 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to even melt the camera film, so how could anyone survive that? The Apollo 16 crew could not have survived a big solar flare firing out when they were on their way to the moon, right? Let's not even get started with Van Allen radiation. Won't this have fogged the film in the cameras? Many theorists have also pointed out that the quality and the number of photographs taken are implausibly high, and the flag fluttered on the moon. How could that happen since there is no wind on the moon? Many keen eyes also noticed that the second stage of the launch rocket or the lunar module ascent stage, or both, made no visible flame. How could that be? But you should know that over 400,000 people worked on the Apollo project for nearly 10 years to put 12 men in orbit and 6 of them on the moon. This means these hundreds of thousands of highly skilled engineers and technicians would have had to keep the secret. Wouldn't it have been easier to fly to the moon than to keep this ghastly secret? It's also possible that only a handful of top executives would have been privileged to this information. So only a small number of people would have known the truth about faking the moon landings, right? Well, let's take the theories apart, one by one now, shall we? There is no atmosphere to efficiently bind lunar surface heat to devices such as cameras that are not in direct contact with it. In a vacuum, only radiation remains as a heat transfer mechanism. The physics of radiative heat transfer are thoroughly understood, and the proper use of passive optical coatings and paints was enough to control the temperature of the film within the cameras. Lunar module temperatures were controlled with similar coatings that gave them a good color. Also, while the moon's surface does get very hot at lunar noon, every Apollo landing was made shortly after lunar sunrise at the landing site. The moon's day is about 29.5 Earth days long, meaning that one moon day lasts nearly 15 Earth days. During the longest days, the astronauts did notice increased cooling loads on their spacesuits as the sun and surface temperature continued to rise, but the effect was easily countered by the passive and active cooling systems. Therefore, since the film was not in direct sunlight, it was not overheated. Radiation fogging film. Radiation did not fog the film because it was kept in metal containers that stopped radiation from fogging the film's emulsion. Even the film carried by uncrewed lunar probes such as the Lunar Orbiter and Luna 3 that used onboard film development processes was not fogged. Remember the claim that the astronauts could not have survived the trip because of exposure to radiation from the Van Allen radiation belt and galactic ambient radiation? Some conspiracists have suggested that Starfish Prime, a high-altitude nuclear test in 1962, formed another intense layer on the Van Allen belt. Now, there are two main Van Allen belts, the inner belt and the outer belt, and a transient third belt. The inner belt is the more dangerous one, containing energetic protons. The outer one has less dangerous low-energy electrons called beta particles. The Apollo spacecraft passed through the inner belt in a matter of minutes, and the outer belt is about 90 minutes. The astronauts were shielded from the ionizing radiation by the aluminium hulls of the spacecraft. Furthermore, the orbital transfer trajectory from Earth to the Moon through the belts was chosen to lessen radiation exposure. Note that even James Van Allen, the discoverer of the Van Allen belt, rebutted the claims that radiation levels were too harmful for the Apollo missions. Phil Platt cited an average dose of less than 1 rem, which is equivalent to the ambient radiation received by living at sea level for 3 years. The total radiation received on the trip was about the same as allowed for workers in the nuclear energy field for a year, and not much more than what space shuttle astronauts received. Concerning the quality of the photos, there would definitely be many poor quality photos taken by the Apollo astronauts, but NASA chose to publish only the best examples. Who publishes their ugly photos? The Apollo astronauts used high-resolution Hasselblad 500 EL cameras with Carl Zeiss optics and 70mm medium format film magazine. Some even argued that since the angle and color of shadows are inconsistent, therefore this suggests that artificial lights were used. But in reality, the shadows on the moon are complicated by reflected light, uneven ground, wide-angle lens distortion, and lunar dust. There are several light sources: the sun, sunlight reflected from the Earth, sunlight reflected from the moon's surface, and sunlight reflected from the astronauts and the lunar module. Light from these sources is scattered by lunar dust in many directions, including into shadows. Shadows falling into craters and hills may appear longer, shorter, and distorted. Shadows also display the properties of vanishing point perspective, leading them to converge to a point on the horizon. That's just it. Others ask, who filmed Armstrong stepping onto the moon? That would be the Apollo TV camera mounted on the side of the lunar module cameras right on the lunar module. The Apollo TV camera mounted in the Modularized Equipment Stowage Assembly, or MESA, of the Apollo lunar module gave a view from the exterior. While still on the module's ladder steps, Armstrong deployed the MESA from the side of the lunar module, unpacking, amongst other things, the TV camera. The TV camera was then powered on and a signal transmitted back to Earth. This meant that upwards of 600 million people on Earth could watch the live feed with only a very slight delay. Similar technology was also used on subsequent Apollo missions. It was also filmed from an automatic 16mm movie camera mounted in a window of the lunar module. Flag fluttered. The flag appeared to flutter because it was rippled due to the folding in storage on the spaceship. The flag was fastened to an L-shaped rod so that it did not hang down. The flag only seemed to flutter when the astronauts were moving it into position. Without air drag, these movements caused the free corner of the flag to swing like a pendulum for some time. Videos show that when the astronauts let go of the flagpole, it vibrates briefly, but then remains still. On the Mythbusters episode, NASA Moon Landing, this theory was further debunked. The lunar modules had no flame because it ran on Erosine-50 and dinitrogen tetroxide propellants, which were fuel and oxidizer, respectively. They were chosen for the simplicity and reliability. They ignite upon contact without the need for a spark, and these propellants produce a nearly transparent exhaust. The same fuel was used by the core of the American Titan II rocket. The transparency of the plumes is apparent in many launch photos. The plumes of rocket engines fired in a vacuum spreads out very quickly as they leave the engine nozzle, further lessening their visibility. Note that rocket engines often run rich to slow internal corrosion. On Earth, the excess fuel burns in contact with atmospheric oxygen, enhancing the visible flame. This cannot happen in a vacuum. Besides, the moon landing was a highly publicized affair that was televised in all continents of the world. Since the US has always had powerful enemies, it is not in their best interest to humiliate the United States by exposing the fraud if the moon landing was not true. Yet all we hear is silence, even from the closest rival of the time in the space race. So that means a lot. Thanks for watching this video. What do you think of the rumors? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more amazing content. See you on the next one. Bye for now.